April in the outskirts of Tennessee brought a kind of gentle sunlight, like an old wool blanket, warm, but carrying the scent of dust and time. Along the gravel paths of Millstone County's annual fair, the calls of sellers, bursts of laughter, wagon wheels, and horse hooves composed a familiar rural symphony. But in a quiet corner of the grounds, where there was no smell of popcorn or soft white sheep, stood a row of iron cages, silent as memories no one was ready to unpack. James stood there, a 14-year-old boy, slender in a dark hoodie faded by the sun, with his hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the small boards hanging beside each cage. He said nothing. James wasn't much of a talker, and silence had become a second skin ever since his father never returned from the wildfire at the farm that year. His grandmother, Mrs. Hattie, stood behind him, arms cradling a cloth bag of oranges, eyes squinting in the sun. She let him choose for himself, no rush, no push. That was their only agreement when they came here today. Find an animal, any animal, so James could learn again how to care about something, or someone, without feeling betrayed by loss. James walked slowly down the row. His eyes passed overexcited little hunting dogs, a few young Labradors wagging their tails, eager for attention. But no one stopped at the old cage near the end of the line, the only one partially covered by a worn tarp. He stopped. Inside, curled up as if trying to shrink itself out of the world, was a German shepherd, large, but so thin that its ribs pushed against its patchy, dull coat. One ear drooped while the other stood alert. Once perhaps black and majestic, its fur now bore scars and bald spots, the ghosts of old wounds crisscrossing faintly beneath the thinning hair. But what made James freeze, what kept him from walking past like everyone else, were the eyes. Not pleading eyes, not hopeless, but silent. A strange kind of silence, old, heavy, as if the creature had seen battlefields and made it back, only no one noticed. James crouched, hands on his knees, looking deep into those pale brown eyes. And in that moment, as if the entire fairground fell silent, the dog looked back. No flinch, no hope, just simply waiting. A man nearby, wearing a volunteer vest, walked over. That one? 3 years old. Was trained as a medical support dog, but the program shut down. Returned twice. Now won't eat, won't respond. They call him Rex, but probably won't be around much longer. James said nothing. He just kept looking at Rex. No barking, no wagging tail. But those eyes others called empty, felt to James like an unspoken calling, as if something inside him had just been stirred awake. "Grandma?" James turned, voice low but firm. "I've made my choice." Hattie didn't look surprised. She looked at the dog in the cage, then at the boy standing before it, and gave a gentle nod. "Then bring him home, James. But remember, sometimes what's broken doesn't need fixing. It just needs to be accepted." James wasn't sure he fully understood, but something inside him had shifted. Something long, cold, and old had begun to crack. And on the other side of the bars, the old dog slowly lifted its head, just a little, as if nodding, too. When Rex stepped out of the iron cage at the fair, there was nothing dramatic. No magical beam of light, no applause, no instant redemption. Just a large, gaunt dog, moving with a quiet heaviness, like each step was a test of memory. And just a 14-year-old boy, holding a frayed leash, walking beside him. No commands, no leading, only side by side. But if someone had stood there long enough, they would have seen. That silence was the first introduction between two beings far too used to being misunderstood. Mrs. Hattie's pickup truck turned off from the fairground and onto a winding red dirt road leading back to the small town of Millstone. James sat in the back seat, holding the leash loosely, though there was no need to pull. Rex lay curled up, head resting against the open space between the two of them. The breeze through the cracked window carried the scent of fresh grass and distant wood smoke. James leaned, looking down at the creature beside him. Rex's fur was patchy, some spots rubbed down to bare skin. A scar traced down his spine to the tail, like a cut for harnesses or armor. His left hind leg was underdeveloped, perhaps from a serious past injury. But what James couldn't stop noticing were the things you couldn't see. The complete stillness. The ears always half-tuned, half-defensive. Rex didn't sleep, just closed his eyes. But every time the truck jolted, James saw his shoulder muscles twitch as if some old command had reawakened. "I think they made him serve," James said quietly, eyes never leaving the dog. Mrs. Hattie glanced at him in the rearview mirror, saying nothing. She knew that kind of observation didn't come from curiosity. It came from a deep instinct, the kind only children who've lost something learn to trust. Their house sat on the edge of town, where the paved road turned to gravel, and grass grew between old tire tracks. Behind the house stood an abandoned chicken coop, now a storage shed filled with hay, rotting beams, and, more than anything, unspoken memories adults chose not to revisit. James led Rex inside. No pulling, no coaxing. The dog followed step by step, not afraid, but wary. He laid down an old blanket, his own, in the cleanest corner. Navy blue, faded stars from too many washes. It was once the blanket his father used to wrap him in on stormy nights. Now it marked the start of a new trust. He patted the blanket gently. Rex stood, watching. No bark, no step forward, just that same look, that same quiet question. "Am I allowed?" "This is yours," James said, sitting on the cement floor. "You don't have to do anything. Just lie down." It took almost 10 minutes, but Rex finally lowered himself, slowly, one part at a time. When his head touched the fabric, James let out a small breath, not out of relief, but because the dog had accepted the first thing since leaving the cage, the right to rest. That night, under the warm yellow light in the kitchen, Mrs. Hattie washed up after trimming the yard, watching James by the window, chin in hand. He didn't eat much, but he didn't seem sad, just quiet in a different way. "They used to say he was broken," James said, almost to himself. "And you don't believe that?" she asked gently. James shook his head. "I think he was trained for something big, something important, and then abandoned, like how people toss away guns after the war. But that doesn't mean he's useless." Mrs. Hattie looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "If you can see that, it means you're starting to heal, too." As night fell over Millston, the houses sank into a lull of radio murmurs, distant cars, and whispering insects. In the shed, Rex didn't sleep, but he lay there, head slightly raised, eyes half shut. James sat by his window, listening to the wind brushing the tin roof. The lamp is still lit. He placed one hand on the sill, the other holding a scrap of paper. Unfinished, not homework, just a few quiet lines. "I don't know what you've been through, but if you're here now, I won't let anyone throw you away again." Far off, in the shadowed corners of the wooden shed, there was a soft sigh no one heard, but James smiled. The midday breeze carried the smell of burnt popcorn and dry hay, blended with sweat and tree sap in the bustling air of the Millstone County Fair. Amid the shouting of vendors and the laughter of children, the faint jingling of a lemonade stand bell, and the rhythmic clop of hooves on the gravel made up a noisy, vibrant symphony, so familiar that anything quiet could easily be passed over. And in a shadowed corner behind the row of pens, where sunlight angled through a frayed tarp, a moment was quietly unfolding, one that no one knew would change the lives of two beings forever. James stood in front of the metal cage, clutching a rusted tin can still sticky with traces of old candy, as if it held not just a few dozen dollars in savings, but also things he had never dared to name. That can be a piece of his silent life. Money from collecting bottles in the summer sun, New Year gifts his mother had tucked away in a drawer, loose change earned helping his grandmother sell strawberries, And most sacred of all, $2 silver his father had handed him before he never came back from the burning farm. "Keep it," his father had said, his voice warm but firm, "for something that matters." Back then, James had only nodded. He never expected that something would take the shape of a worn-down German shepherd, thin, weary, lying motionless behind iron bars like a forgotten warrior in the world he once served. "Lot 47, the auctioneer's voice rang out, hurried and dry. "German shepherd, 3 years old. Former medical support dog. Returned twice. No guarantees. No response. Starting bid, $100. No one answered. Just the wind stirring the tarp overhead, making the price tag hanging from the cage sway softly. 75? He tried again, voice louder, but was met only with awkward silence and averted gazes. No one? He clicked his tongue, eyeing the folks standing near the cage. 50? Still silence. Not so much disinterest as a quiet kind of refusal only small towns knew how to deliver. Not cruel, just unwilling to get involved. Then James lifted the tin can and stepped toward the wooden auction table. He set it down wordlessly, then looked up, eyes steel gray and full of resolve. "I'll take him." The words weren't loud, but they rang out like the final nail sealing off hesitation. The auctioneer hesitated, frowning. "You sure, kid?" James nodded, saying nothing more. The can was opened. Coins tumbled, a few crumpled bills stained with ink, and at the bottom, 2 shining silver dollars, small in material value, but heavy with meaning only someone holding the weight could measure. $53.40, the man finished counting, his tone noticeably gentler. "That's probably everything you've got." "It's everything I'm willing to give," James replied. There were a few chuckles behind him, not cruel, but far from kind. A woman whispered to her friend, "Picked the one closest to dying." A teenager laughed. "Might as well be a stuffed toy." James didn't turn around. He didn't need anyone to understand. The only thing he waited for was this. Would the dog step out of the cage? For him? The squeak of the rusty hinge echoed as the cage door swung open. Rex didn't react right away, but after a long exhale, not of exhaustion, but as if steeling himself, he began to move. Each step Rex took had a strange quality, neither slow nor shaky, not resistant either. It wasn't joy, not the eager energy of a dog finally free. It was the gait of someone who once followed orders, but no longer believed anyone was worth listening to. So instead of rushing to James, Rex simply approached, just enough to see the boy's face. Their eyes met. James didn't crouch, didn't reach out. He just stood still, holding the leash like a ribbon. Not tight, not demanding, just a quiet offer. And then something remarkable happened. Rex stopped beside James, standing tall, his head level with the boy's shoulder as if they had always walked together, just long enough for the world to forget. From a distance, Mrs. Hattie stood, one hand shading her eyes, the other gripping her bag. The breeze tugged at her coat and swept her silver hair across her temple. No one saw her eyes mist over, not from worry, but from recognition. She'd seen this before. A soldier once broken, and someone willing to believe that broken didn't mean worthless. On the drive home, the truck moved slowly along the dusty red road. James sat in the back seat with Rex lying beside him, head resting on his leg, asleep, but alert, half ready to rise, half learning to relax again. Mrs. Hattie spoke, her voice low, eyes on the road. "You know, James' trust always has a price, and the one being trusted isn't always the one who pays it." James nodded, gently running his hand over the patchy fur on Rex's shoulder. "I think he's already paid his part. Now it's my turn." She said nothing more, but in her rearview mirror, the glance she gave carried a warmth like an old winter hearth, not blazing, but enduring. When the truck stopped at the front gate, James opened the door, and without needing to be told, Rex stepped down after him. His limp on the back left leg remained, but something about his stance felt steadier, as if each step was slowly retrieving an old memory. James opened the wooden gate, leading toward the old shed. Once a chicken coop, now filled with dry hay, dusty memories, and just enough quiet space to begin healing. No celebration, no reward, just a navy blue blanket on the floor and a boy waiting. Rex watched for a moment, then stepped inside, curled up, and laid his head on James's leg, as if to say, without words, that this boy was the only one left who saw him as something more than a broken thing. And James, sitting among weathered gray walls, with sunlight slicing through the slats, leaned down and whispered, "You're not broken. You're just waiting for someone to call you by the right name again." On the first night in the new home, Rex didn't sleep deeply, but James had expected that. The big dog lay curled in the corner of the cleaned-out shed, nearly filling the star-patterned blanket James had laid out earlier. Light from James's bedroom window spilled through a hole in the tin roof, forming a thin band of starlight like a lost galaxy. In that quiet beam, Rex stayed motionless, head resting on his paws, ears alert, eyes not fully closed, as if dreams were still dangerous places. James didn't sleep right away. He lay on his side, watching through the cracked window, listening to Rex's breathing blend with the still sounds of the night. The wind rustled the trees behind the house, stirred the sheer curtain, and somewhere, a lone cricket sang the slow, familiar song of a reluctant spring. He wasn't sure if he was worrying for Rex, or using the dog to hold on to a part of himself that hadn't shattered yet. Maybe both. The next morning, James got up earlier than usual. He quietly went to the kitchen, filled an old ceramic bowl with fresh water, and sliced a few pieces of leftover sausage, the first meal he would prepare for Rex. But when he opened the shed door, Rex didn't act hungry. He simply lifted his head, eyes fixed on James, as if checking whether the boy still meant what he'd said the night before. No bark, no tail wag, just a silent test. James set the bowl down, not pushing. He sat beside Rex, letting him take the time, like a friend waiting beside someone waking from a nightmare that had lasted too many years. Nearly 10 minutes passed before Rex stood, moved slowly and drank in careful sips. Every motion was cautious, but not hesitant, as if he remembered how. It just hadn't mattered in a long while. That afternoon, James and Mrs. Hattie cleaned the backyard. They pulled weeds, pried ivy off the fence, and replaced rusted roof panels on the shed. Rex was lightly tethered to a stake beneath a tree. Shade, fresh water, and a clear view of the garden. He lay there, eyes never leaving James, blinking occasionally but never truly resting, until a loud hammer strike hit the metal roof. Rex shot up. His large body froze mid-air for a split second, then dropped low. Legs tucked, head down, ears sharp, lips twitching, his eyes glazed, not in fear, but in the sudden flood of memory. James dropped his glove, startled, but didn't shout or panic. He just watched Rex, and for the first time, saw a fear not rooted in the present, but from somewhere distant and old. Maybe a battlefield or a forest night with flares and orders screamed over gunfire. Rex didn't snarl, didn't bolt, but his whole body trembled, from shoulders to hips, as if struggling to suppress a command once burned into him by shouts through smoke and chaos. Mrs. Hattie saw it. She put down the hammer, approached slowly, and didn't make eye contact. She knew better. Standing just behind James, her voice low. He's remembering something. Not now. An old reflex. James looked up. Like a nightmare? Like the memory of someone who never left the fight. Rex slowly lowered his head. His breath was still fast, but his eyes were coming back. James stepped down, backed off gently, then extended a hand. Not to grab, just to offer. It took several minutes before Rex stepped forward and leaned into James's hand, heavy as if holding himself up had become too much. Mrs. Hattie sat in the old wooden chair nearby. She stayed quiet for a long time before speaking, as though every word needed careful choosing. "James, you know he's not a house dog, not a farm dog, not a broken dog. James said nothing. He simply rested his hand on Rex's shoulder, gently, like you'd hold a door that's been cracked before. She went on. You brought home a soldier, one who was trained to sense danger before it happened. And now, the scariest thing for him is sudden peace. James looked down, eyes still on Rex. I'm not sure I'm enough to help him heal. She shook her head. You don't have to bring him back. Just stay beside him while he learns how to stay. And so that afternoon, beneath a patched-up tin roof, with wind threading through the oak behind the house, James sat next to a dog once labeled broken, and understood for the first time that caring for someone doesn't begin with understanding. It begins with not walking away. 3 days after that afternoon, Rex began to eat again. Slowly, but consistently. James realized it wasn't because the food had gotten better, but because Rex was less guarded with the space around him. Like a door long rusted at the hinges, now cracked open just enough to let the light seep in. That evening, a soft rain fell. Troublesome, but not lasting. April rains in Millstone often arrived suddenly and left quietly, like a whispered thought. James couldn't take Rex out for the walk he had planned, so instead, he decided to do what Mrs. Hattie had suggested a few days earlier. Bathe Rex. Not because he was dirty, but because, as she said, a dog's skin tells you more than its bark ever will. She handed James an old bucket, a bottle of orange blossom-scented soap, and a worn-edged towel. The iron tub in the shed was propped up with bricks to stay level. Rex stood there, not resisting but not relaxed either. He let James pour warm water down his back, lather the soap into his rough coat, and gently clean each scar like he was touching untold stories. James did everything slowly and carefully, missing nothing. He didn't speak, didn't joke, didn't command, just lathered, rinsed, and wiped as if he were washing away not just the dirt, but things no one had dared to touch before. And then, in a quiet moment, when James gently lifted Rex's right ear to clean inside, he saw it. A faint line of letters and numbers blurred like ink washed in the rain, but still legible enough to form shapes. James froze. He set the towel down and leaned closer. Blue-black ink, faded with time, printed along the inner edge of the ear, where light rarely reached. "Grandma!" James called out, his voice unsure if it carried surprise or alarm. "I think there's something here." Mrs. Hattie walked in a few seconds later, still holding the basket of greens she'd been sorting. The moment she saw James peering into Rex's ear, her eyes changed. Not curious, but recognizing. The kind of recognition that comes from someone who's known too many things that had to stay hidden. She moved closer, knelt beside them, and gently pulled the ear back, right where she'd once seen something similar, more than 40 years ago. "That's not a pet tattoo," she said softly. "That's a military ID code." James's eyes widened. "Military?" She nodded. "Canine service dogs. The ones fully trained and deployed to the field. Each one has a personal code, tattooed into their ear. It's standard. There's no mistake." Rex stood still. He didn't flinch, didn't react, as if used to being examined that way long ago. But James saw it. When her hand brushed the inked skin, a small tremor passed through Rex's shoulder, like a breeze stirring an old wound that had healed on the surface, but never deep in the marrow. "So he's been somewhere," James whispered. "Possibly," she said. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, who knows? But one thing's certain. He wasn't born to rot in a cage at some fair." James sat on the floor, staring at Rex. Not as a dog anymore, but as a question hurled into the world. What had he lived through? Who once called his name every morning? Who waited for him to return and never saw him come home? And why was he here now? Alone, frail, silent, as if no one had ever remembered him. There was no answer, just Rex's eyes, soft now, slowly turning toward him. No clear emotion, no plea, but not empty either. It was the kind of look that asked, "Will you still stay, now that you know?" James exhaled slowly. He reached forward, placing a palm on Rex's chest, where he could feel the uneven beat of his heart. "I don't know what you used to be," he said, eyes locked on the dog, not on Hattie. "But to me, from the start, you've already been someone." Mrs. Hattie rose, wordlessly carrying the towel to wash. But just before she stepped through the doorway, she paused. "If you want to know who Rex is," she said, "you can start with that code." Then she left, leaving James alone with Rex and the story etched in the soft skin behind his right ear. From the moment he saw the faint tattoo inside Rex's ear, James no longer saw a discarded dog. He saw an unanswered question, and in those quiet eyes, he could almost hear a voice whispering, "Help me remember." The next day, while the town melted into a soft, early spring drizzle, James slipped into the old shed, now Rex's home. On the floor was a deep blue comforter, a few borrowed books on canine training from the library, and beside them, Rex, curled up, head resting on his paws, eyes open but distant. James opened the book Canine Training Handbook, a volume that probably hadn't been seriously read in years. The frayed pages detailed the exact commands military dogs were trained to recognize: sit, down, heel, guard, and stay, with notes on tone, pronunciation, and accompanying body language. He began to try the first commands. "Rex, sit," James said, voice gentle. Nothing but a slow blink. "Down." Rex glanced at him, head tilted slightly, but still unmoved. James sighed and sat beside him. Outside, the rain drummed gently on the tin roof, a quiet rhythm of passing time. He skimmed through the notes again. Some commands, the book explained, didn't lie in the words, but in the emotion behind them, in the trust conveyed through voice and gaze. It was something a soldier gave to his four-legged partner, not a command, but a pact. James looked up, locking eyes with Rex. He remembered the moment the dog stepped from his cage and stood by his side, as if something had been recognized, as if not everything had been lost. He tried again, his voice now lower, more certain, not harsh but firm. "Guard." One word, and the air around them changed. Rex startled, his body shifted, head lifted, ears snapped to attention. In a breath he moved forward, stepping in front of James, not fast, but deliberate. Rex stood squarely before the boy, legs slightly bent, back arched, the stance of a sentinel. His eyes scanned the dim room, assessing it like a perimeter. James froze. His heart pounded, not from fear, but awe. He had awakened something. Not instinct, but the memory of a soldier. Rex didn't bark. He didn't tremble. He stood calmly, focused, ready. And in that stillness, James saw not a broken dog once abandoned, but a warrior who had merely gone dormant. After nearly 20 seconds, Rex lowered his head and turned back to James. His eyes weren't vacant now. There was a glint, faint but real, awareness. Perhaps not full clarity, but proof that memory hadn't died. James stepped closer, knelt by Rex, and placed a hand on his shoulder. He felt the breath, heavy but steady. The body, thin but grounded. "I don't know who you used to protect," James whispered, "but if you did it once, you can do it again. Not for war. For yourself. For me." Rex slowly leaned his head against James's knee. At that moment, the boy and the dog were no longer strangers, but two souls rediscovered in the ashes and silence. A thread had been tied, not with a word, but with understanding. Early summer afternoons in Edgewood always carried the scent of dry hay, damp soil, and the distant chirring of cicadas. At the far end of the backyard, the old wooden shed where Rex slept had been cleaned out by James, lined with fresh straw and lit by a hanging oil lamp whose soft glow spilled across the patchy fur and old scars of the aging dog. Inside, Rex often lay curled up, eyes open but seemingly unfocused. Sometimes the flap of a sparrow's wing or a single falling leaf would jolt his body, as if some long engraved habit was still firing off warnings from a war James didn't yet understand. James still sat beside him every evening, slowly reading from the training manual he had borrowed from the town library, repeating each command with warmth and patience. Not because he expected Rex to obey, but because he wanted to remind him, "You're still here, and I'm not leaving." Perhaps he was saying that to himself, too. The school was still a different world. Peeling paint on doors, the cold clang of the old bell, and long hallways where students whispered things they thought were harmless. James Walker brought home a dying dog. He says it used to be a military dog. Delusional. The words weren't loud enough for teachers to hear, but they cut deep enough to leave marks. James didn't respond. Since his father's death, silence had become his armor. What he didn't expect was that someone else had heard something different. That day, in the schoolyard, James was sitting in his usual spot beneath the big oak tree. On his lap was a notebook filled with observations about Rex's behaviors. Lifted head at the word guard, ear twitched, eyes sharpened. A notebook of seemingly trivial details, but to James, it was a map of memory for a soul once erased. Luke approached from behind. He didn't call out, didn't make a scene. He simply sat down, keeping a respectful distance, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, yellowed, like old sunlight. "I heard you call the dog Rex," Luke said. "My brother used to have one just like that. His name was Jasper, also a German shepherd, also someone." James looked up and nodded silently. Luke's eyes weren't curious or pitying. They held the weariness of someone who had seen more than their age should allow. "I found this in our garage," Luke said. "Jasper's old training notes. Maybe Rex would understand it." James took the paper carefully and unfolded it. The edges were worn, a few corners stained with cookie crumbs and dust, but in the middle, the writing was still clear. "When giving a command, look them in the eye. Don't let your voice shake. Dogs don't hear words, they hear hearts." And at the bottom, in neater handwriting, "A warrior, whether man or dog, needs a reason to come back." James sat in silence for a long while. Then he looked up. "Thanks. Really?" Luke nodded. "I don't know much, but if you ever need someone to practice commands with or just someone to listen, I'm here." From that afternoon on, Luke came to James's house every weekend. Not loud, not offering help like a savior, just arriving with an old backpack, some snacks, and sometimes a book with dogs on the cover. At first, Rex was uncomfortable. He still curled up in the farthest corner of the shed, body tight like every human carried a hidden threat. But Luke never pushed. He sat outside the fence and told stories about Jasper, how the dog helped his brother calm down during panic attacks, how Jasper slept beside Adam through seizures, even once pressing the emergency alert button with his snout when the family was asleep. James listened, and Rex began to shift. Not much, but instead of turning his back to the wall, he started watching them, slowly, one time at a time. One afternoon, as Luke recounted the rainy night Jasper was hit by a car, James saw Rex step forward and gently rest his chin on Luke's knee. No growl, no bark, just a soft, silent touch. "I understand." Luke's eyes filled with tears. James didn't look away. Between the three of them, a boy who had lost a father, a boy who had lost a friend, and a dog who had lost both his name and reason to live, something began to connect. No words were needed, but it was clear. Their friendship didn't grow through laughter or games, but through acceptance, an unspoken kind of empathy. Since the day Luke entered James's life, the air in the Walker backyard had changed, not livelier, but deeper. Rex, who once curled up in the corner like every gaze was a threat, had started stepping out of the silence. James and the dog had found their rhythm. Now, with Luke, a boy who carried both memory and hope, something close to healing had begun. That afternoon, the sunlight lay still like a lake, painting the shed roof gold. Luke spread his notes out on the small table by the kennel door, while James held a flashlight and a thick manual marked K9 ID Lookup, Military and Retired Service Animal Support Protocols. An old volume Mrs. Hattie had dug out from a war-era archive bin in the attic. Rex lay nearby, eyes half closed. But when James gently touched his left ear, the one with the faded ink, he didn't flinch. He only turned his gaze toward James, softer now, and James knew, we're doing this together. Can you read the code again? Luke asked, tablet ready in hand. James sat beside Rex, whispered permission, then slowly pulled back the ear. Rex stayed calm. K9-3-5-1-7-SH, James read aloud. Luke typed the sequence into a special lookup system maintained by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Old, but with a section dedicated to military service dogs. The screen spun for a moment. Then it appeared. K93-517SH, code name, Shadow Breed, German Shepherd. Male role, Mine Detection and Tactical Guard. Dog Unit, Bravo 7, FOB Collage, Afghanistan. Status MIA, Missing in Action, as of June 27, 2019. James went still. The word missing felt like it punched the air out of his lungs. Luke read it again, slower. So Shadow was part of a K9 unit, detecting mines and then just vanished? James nodded faintly. His hand still rested on Rex's back, feeling the slight movements in the muscles, like echoes of something deep in the bones. He read the lines again. Shadow mine detection, tactical protection. Bravo 7th, a name. A role, a forgotten history. I think they thought he was dead, James whispered. No one found him, no one reported him, so they marked him missing. Then moved on. Luke said nothing. He knew that feeling. His brother had nearly become a forgotten entry in a system that wrote people off with phrases like unrecoverable, non-functional, and no longer eligible for medical aid. If not for Jasper. The boys sat in silence next to the old dog. Rex didn't understand it all, but his ears perked slightly, as if hearing something far off. Not words, but the faint echo of the name he once had. Shadow. James leaned in, whispering close to Rex's ear. Shadow. That's your name, isn't it? There was no response at first. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rex turned his head. His cloudy brown eyes met James's, not with suspicion, but with something almost like recognition. Shadow, James repeated, firmer this time. Rex inhaled, his chest rising just a little more than usual, not bracing to react, but as if absorbing something long lost. James turned to Luke with a faint smile, not wide, not triumphant, but the first hint of a small victory. You think, James asked, if we find Rex's, Shadow's old unit, they'll remember him? Luke nodded, eyes still on the screen. If I had a dog who saved my life, I'd never forget him. James slowly closed the manual. The sun was tilting into the evening now, and the wind carried a chill of late May. Above, the light fell across Rex's back, and the scars along his spine seemed to glint, no longer just reminders of pain, but living proof of battles endured. James gently stroked the ridge of Rex's neck and whispered, You're not missing anymore, Shadow. We found you. Rex didn't move noticeably, but he didn't turn away either. He stayed, right there, between two boys and an old government record. And at that moment, his silhouette, silent, unmoving, stood taller than the wooden doorway of the old shed. A soldier returned from a war no one remembered. That night, in a light, restless sleep, Rex, or rather Shadow, began to tremble. The rustling wind in the backyard, the tap of dry branches on the tin roof, and the smell of damp straw awakened something. Not of the present, but a memory buried deep, where the sand burned underfoot and bullets hissed through the air. Inside the small wooden shed, the yellow light swayed. James was sound asleep in the house. But for Rex, a door had opened, not through sound, but through memory. For the first time in years, the image of a man returned clearly in the dog's dream. Marcus, with his calm gray eyes, his warm, steady voice, and that half-dry, half-gentle smile. "You're my shadow, buddy. Don't need a leash. Where I go, you go." Flashback. June 2019, Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Kalaj, near the southern border. The skies there burned golden by day and turned pitch black by night. Amid endless dusty roads and crumbling brick buildings, a special unit was tasked with mine detection and convoy protection in high-risk zones. Within that team was a German shepherd named Shadow, an irreplaceable member of the Bravo 7 squad. Marcus, sergeant, reconnaissance specialist, had once been a hardened soldier, quiet and skeptical of everything except the rifle in his hands. But that changed the first day Shadow arrived at the base. It didn't take tests or long drills. Within 3 minutes, Marcus knew. This dog wasn't just a tool. He understood. Not just verbal commands, but the heartbeat of soldiers. When the team was tense, Shadow tensed. When someone panicked, he stood by them. When danger neared, he didn't wait for orders. He moved first. 2 weeks in, Marcus ditched the leash. "He knows what to do. I don't need to drag him anywhere," he said. The mission in Helmand that day was their 13th together. A routine check of a reported area along a supply route. Suspicious movement had been detected days earlier, but Marcus had a gut feeling. Something felt wrong the night before, and Shadow was more alert than ever. He stayed glued to Marcus since morning, didn't leave his side. Every time someone passed by, his ears twitched, his eyes fixed on them, unblinking. "What is it? You smell something?" Marcus asked, gently brushing Shadow's back. The dog didn't bark or growl, just tensed, as if preparing for something. As the squad approached the marked zone, Shadow broke formation and veered left. No one stopped him. That was routine. Shadow always scouted ahead, slow and deliberate. Every step he took was a step that might save lives. Marcus followed closely, eyes fixed on the paw prints pressed into the hardened ground. Suddenly, Shadow froze. Not just stopped, froze. He turned his head toward Marcus. That look. Marcus would never forget it. Not panic, but certainty. A soldier's look when they knew something was about to explode. "What is it?" Marcus stepped forward. Shadow turned back and bolted straight ahead, toward a small mound, slightly different in color. "Shadow!" Marcus shouted. A second later, the explosion ripped through the ground. Everything shook. Dirt and rock rained down, smashing against Marcus's helmet. A dull ringing swallowed all sound. He was flung backward, rolling across burning sand, his back seared, his shoulder limp. "Shadow!" he coughed, choking on smoke and dust. No response. He scrambled and scraped the earth with bloodied fingers, dragging himself toward the blast zone. Nothing but ash, heat, and a crater in dry soil. He dug with his hands, desperate, frenzied. Nails cracked, palms raw, but only sand and stone. When the medics arrived, they had to pull Marcus away. "There's nothing left, Marcus. He couldn't have survived that." But Marcus repeated one thing over and over. "Shadow didn't die. He shielded me, but he didn't die." Back in Edgewood, inside the shed, Rex trembled. His chest rose in tight, rapid jerks, eyes wide, panicked. A low, broken whine escaped his throat. James was asleep, but the scratching claws on the wood jolted him awake. He ran down to the yard and flung open the shed door. "Rex! Shadow!" Rex spun around. Panic flared in his eyes for the first time. Clear. Unmistakable. James dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe." Rex shivered but didn't resist. Slowly, his breath began to settle. James stayed beside him until near dawn. He didn't ask anything. He didn't need to. He just was there. Just like Marcus once was a hand on Shadow's back in the middle of Kalaj Base. That dog had once pulled a soldier from the grip of death, and then vanished. But now, in a straw-strewn shed beneath a pale moon. Shadow had come back. Since the nightmare, since the war memory broke through, Rex, or Shadow, wasn't the same. James noticed it. Day by day, the soldier inside the dog stirred again. Reflexes, awareness, that watchful gaze. No one trained him. No one commanded him. But Rex now knew what he was doing. And then came the night James would never forget. In the small, sleeping town, lights were out, and the only sound was wind rustling through the pines. James lay sleeping, window cracked open to let in the early summer breeze, fresh with the scent of cut grass. Rex lay beneath the bed, eyes closed, ears alert. He never slept deeply, as if forever waiting for a signal even he couldn't name. It was 2:17 a.m. Rex shot up. Not from a sound, not from light, but a smell. That sharp, bitter, dusty, sweet smell. Smoke. He leapt to the window, outside to the left, past the fence. Orange flickers danced in the dark. Smoke snaked into the night sky. Rex spun around and rushed to James's bed, tugging at the blanket with his teeth. "What, Rex? What is it?" James muttered, groggy. A sharp bark. Urgent. Rex bolted to the door, scratching hard. Then the smoke hit. James jolted upright, ran to the window, and saw it. The neighboring house, the Thompsons. Flames flickering from the first floor. Smoke curled up the roof. "Fire! Grandma Hattie!" James tore downstairs, shouting. Mrs. Hattie leaped from bed, calling the fire department. James sprinted out the door. He followed Rex, who darted like an arrow through the back fence. The main door was locked. Flames licked from the kitchen. The side door jammed. Rex looped around back. A faint voice from the second floor. "Mommy!" James's throat closed. "Mason. It's Mason." Mason Thompson, 6 years old, lived with his mom and grandmother, always played ball in the afternoons. He was upstairs, and the flames had reached the hallway. Rex didn't wait. He dove through the broken kitchen window, glass shattered by heat. "Rex, no!" James screamed. No response. The dog's shadow vanished into smoke. Inside, heat scorched every nerve, but Rex pressed on, staying low, muzzle to the ground, navigating through the dark by instinct and the sound of tears. Up the stairs, step by burning step, dodging flames that licked the railings. In the bedroom corner, Mason huddled behind a curtain, trembling, eyes wide with fear and tears. Then, through the smoke, a black shape burst in, eyes gleaming, not a nightmare, a lifeline. Rex moved in, slow and low. Mason cried harder and clung to Rex's neck. The dog crouched, gripped the boy's shirt gently, and pulled. They made it to the hallway. Now an inferno. No way down. Rex turned, leading Mason to the end room. An open window. Below, James saw them. "Mason! Rex!" Rex pressed beside Mason, guiding him to the ledge. No balcony, but a thick bush beneath. James ran into place. "Jump! I've got you!" Mason hesitated. Rex nudged him. He jumped and landed in the bush with a thud, but was unharmed. James pulled him up. "Rex, come on, jump!" Behind Rex, the door burst open, flames roaring. No more time. Rex leapt. He hit the ground hard and stumbled. A low yelp. Fur singed, eyes burning, but he stood. James threw his arms around him. "You did it. You did it, Rex, Shadow." Sirens echoed. Neighbors rushed outside. Mason's mother screamed, hugging her son. "That dog saved him," James said, voice shaking. A firefighter crouched beside Rex, who was panting, eyes dazed. "Looks like a combat dog," the man murmured. James said nothing, but in his chest he whispered, "Not like. He is." No one slept that night, but on the back steps, bathed in golden haze, amid smoke and ash, something had been proven. A soldier's instinct never truly fades. And Rex, the dog once called too old, too tired, too broken, had once again, with nothing but his body and will, become a hero. The morning after, Edgewood woke up to a different kind of air. No longer the usual peace. Echoes of fire truck sirens still rang in people's minds, soot clung faintly to rooftops, and the acrid scent of fire lingered in the breeze. But amid the weariness and the wreckage, one name began to surface, not with pity, but with respect. The dog who ran into the fire, as more and more people said, still visibly shaken. The first to write about it was a young journalist from the Edgewood Chronicle, the town's modest weekly newspaper. She showed up that morning with a shaky coffee cup in one hand and a recorder in the other. When James opened the door and Rex, resting at the bottom of the stairs, came into view, her eyes paused. "This is the dog?" James nodded. She stepped closer. Rex didn't bark, didn't move. He simply lifted his head, his eyes not pleading for recognition, but calm, like someone who had done what needed to be done, and asked for nothing more. The article ran on Monday morning, printed on plain white paper with a bold headline, "Town's Warrior, the forgotten dog who saved a boy from the fire." The piece wasn't sensationalized. It told the story plainly. A dog named Rex, adopted by James Walker at an animal auction, once labeled as old, slow, and useless. But when the fire came, he didn't hesitate. He ran in, pulled Mason Thompson out, and needed no leash, no command, no reward. In just one night, the article spread across the town's local social media. Then it spread further. The most liked comment came from Mason's mother. "I owe my son's life to this dog. I didn't believe in miracles. Now I do." The elementary school principal wrote, "We always teach our students about bravery. Today, I think we need to also teach them about patience and about not judging anyone by appearances." Not long after, a group of local veterans spoke up. One of them, Robert Hartley, a former serviceman from Iraq, came to James's house just to shake his hand. When he saw Rex, he stood at attention, then saluted, as one would a fellow soldier. "That boy's not just a dog," he said in a low voice. "I can see it in how he watches, how he guards. He's been trained. He's saved lives. He knows." James stood beside him in silence. But in his eyes, something had softened, like the breeze after a storm. James's school invited him to speak at the Monday morning assembly. For the first time, the quiet boy, once the subject of whispers and teasing, stood on the school's main platform, with his dog beside him. Rex stood calmly by his feet, scanning the crowd, body relaxed but alert, as though still on duty. James held the microphone and spoke slowly. "Rex isn't special because he saved someone. He's special because even when no one believed in him, he never forgot how to protect others." A full minute of silence followed. Not out of shock, but because no one wanted to break the moment. After the ceremony, students lined up to gently touch Rex's back. Some said, "Thank you." Some said nothing at all. Just a soft stroke, then walked away. But to Rex, each touch was like a medal. No medal, no ceremony, just the simple message. "You earned this." News spread beyond the town. A small TV crew from a nearby city came to film a segment. An animal rescue organization offered to award Rex the Medal of Courage. Someone sent premium dog food. Someone else offered to write a book. James accepted everything with quiet caution. He didn't like noise. But he knew every story about Rex helped change how people saw things. Not just dogs, but all beings ever labeled too old, useless, beyond saving. Through it all, Rex stayed the same, lying on the porch steps, ears perked, eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't seem to care about media or medals. To him, the world was still a place to watch over, a place where threats might hide in silence, and he would be there, guarding it, like every quiet warrior who never left his post. One afternoon, Luke came by carrying a newspaper clipping his mom had cut and framed. "You gonna hang this up?" Luke asked. James smiled and shook his head. "I'll put it next to Rex's shed, so anyone who visits can see what he did." Luke looked at Rex, half asleep in the afternoon sun, breathing steadily. You think he understands everything that's happening? James paused before answering, voice low but steady. He doesn't need to understand. He just needs to know. No one sees him as someone left behind anymore. Marcus's small house sat tucked between tall pine trees in rural Colorado, where the sky was always cold blue, and the wind through the wooden eaves sounded like the voice of memory. Since leaving the military, he had chosen to live far from cities, far from noise, and most of all, far from war. It had been 5 years since anyone last spoke the name Shadow. To others, he was just a military dog, lost in action. But to Marcus, Shadow was the name that came back to him every time he closed his eyes, determined, intelligent, and willing to die to save someone else. Marcus had never believed Shadow died. There was no blood, no body, no sign, just an explosion, and then silence. They called it missing in action. But to Marcus, it was an absence that never stopped echoing. That morning, Marcus woke as usual, made coffee, turned on the radio, picked up the newspaper from the box outside. Routine. He wasn't looking for anything, just keeping rhythm. But something was off. The paper was wrong. Not the Denver Times he subscribed to, but a copy of the Edgewood Chronicle from another state, thin and pale, like it came from a sleepy town. Marcus almost tossed it, until a headline on the back caught his eye. Small-town warrior, the dog who saved a boy from a fire. He froze. There was a photo, blurry but unmistakable. A German shepherd beside a boy and an older woman. The dog's eyes in that photo made Marcus's chest seize. He dropped onto the steps, his weathered eyes, trained by loss and survival, locked on the photo. No way. He read on. Called Rex, adopted from an auction for elderly animals, now celebrated for rescuing a 6-year-old boy from a fire. His eyes scanned every word until they landed on one line. His new owner, a boy named James Walker, found faint markings inside the dog's ear. K93-517SH. The paper slipped from his fingers. Shadow. He didn't say it. He breathed it. There was no doubt. The dog in the photo, older, thinner, grayer, but the ears, the eyes, the stance, it was him. Shadow. You're alive. Suddenly, the quiet years collapsed inward. The blast, the fire, the dreams, the footsteps he used to follow, the unanswered calls in the night. Shadow. Now they had an answer. Marcus stood. His hands trembled as he picked up the phone. He searched for the paper's name, their address, the contact info. He dialed. Hello, Edgewood Chronicle. This is Lizzie. A young woman's voice. Hi, my name is Marcus Trent. I served in the K9 unit. The article this morning. About the dog that saved a child, Rex. I wrote that piece, yes? It mentioned code K93-517SH. Yes. The boy found it in the dog's ear. He believes... No, he doesn't have to believe. I know. That's Shadow. That's my partner. I thought he was gone. Silence. Her voice softened. Were you in Bravo 7? Yes. Shadow saved me from an IED. I'm alive because of him. Another pause. Mr. Trent, James needs to hear this. Let me connect you two. 2 days later, Marcus was on the road. He drove his old pickup across 3 states, carrying a small backpack, some old photos, and a letter he had never mailed. A letter written to Shadow in 2020 during therapy, meant to say goodbye. But now he knew. The story wasn't over. Because it hadn't ended with a goodbye. It had to end with an embrace. On the 3rd evening, as his truck turned onto the road into Edgewood, Marcus saw golden fields stretching wide, kids on bikes, and in the middle of it all, James sitting on the front lawn with Rex dozing at his feet. Marcus parked, stepped out, and walked forward. James looked up. You must be James, Marcus said, voice cracking. James nodded. You saved Shadow. James stood. Rex rose too. His ears flicked. Then he stepped forward. Marcus knelt. Shadow. The dog stopped in front of him, lifted his head, then, softly, let out a quiet, trembling whine, like wind over a memory. Marcus dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around him, eyes red. "You're alive. You're still my warrior." For the first time in 5 years, the door to Marcus's past gently closed. Not with pain, but with a warm, quiet touch, where the souls of a man and a dog met again in a small town amid the ordinary rhythms of life. That afternoon, the sky over Edgewood felt lower, grayer even though there was no rain. The sunlight was filtered by a dull layer of clouds, a soft, somber light that often stirred old memories. James sat blankly on the front steps, eyes fixed on the narrow road ahead. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his leg, breathing evenly. 2 days had passed since the phone call from the man named Marcus, a name that had been echoing in James's mind like an unfinished melody ever since. When a silver pickup truck turned onto the dirt road, its tires stirring up fine dust, James instinctively clenched his hands. He recognized the figure stepping out. Tall, solid despite looking weary, with graying hair and ashen eyes. Yet something about him was calm. Like Rex when he hears a strange noise but doesn't bark, just watches in silence. Marcus stood still for a moment at the fence. He didn't call out, didn't hurry in, just quietly searched with his eyes. Rex stood up, not the way he usually did, but with weight, as if his body were reacting to something ancient, buried deep in memory. James said nothing. He only placed a hand on Rex's shoulder, as if whispering without words. "You know, don't you?" Marcus stepped closer. A soft breeze carried a familiar scent. Wood, earth, and sweat. Rex walked toward the gate. Each step seemed to carry the breath of a long-lost time. When they were only an arm's length apart, Marcus knelt, eyes glistening. "Shadow," he choked out, the name barely a sound. Rex hesitated for a second, then let out a soft whine. Marcus laughed gently through his tears. "You remember me." The dog threw himself into Marcus's arms. No barking, no scratching, just buried his head into Marcus's chest, nuzzling deep, whimpering as if to make up for all the silent years. James stood watching, eyes red. Hattie stepped out from the house, wiping flour from her hands, and froze at the doorway. In the silence, she too could feel it. The unspoken bond between two survivors, stronger than time or distance. Marcus held Rex close, his rough hand stroking the dog's back, where age had thinned the fur. "You're still here, soldier. Still whole." Rex looked up at him, his eyes clouded but strangely bright, as if they still held the image of dusty fields, footsteps in sync, and a siren cutting through the desert air. They sat like that for a long time, until Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I thought I lost him. That day, the explosion." James sat down beside Rex, tilting his head. "Will you tell me what happened?" Marcus nodded. His eyes gazed far away, but his voice came back close. "That day, we were on a mission near the supply route by the border. The team had split into 2. I went ahead with Shadow to check for mine. He always stayed a few steps ahead, with no leash needed. Never did." He paused. Rex whimpered softly in response. Then he stopped, ears up. I knew something was wrong. Before I could react, he darted toward a mound, where the explosive was buried. And then, he lifted his face, eyes shimmering. He put himself between me and the mine. I was thrown back, lost consciousness. When I came to, there was smoke, dust, blood everywhere. I kept calling him, but he was gone. I read in the reports. They said Rex, Shadow was missing, James whispered. They never found a body. But I didn't believe he was dead. I knew he was smarter than that. I knew he'd run. But I never thought I'd see him again. James laid a hand on Rex's back. I never thought an old, skinny dog could be a hero. Marcus gave a low, rough smile, warm despite everything. He doesn't need to be called a hero. He just needs someone to believe he still matters. All 3 fell silent in the fading light of day. A moment later, Marcus pulled a small item from his pocket. A torn piece of cloth, carefully folded, inside it a partially scorched medal. "I've kept this since the day I thought he died. It's the K9 badge for Bravo 7. I want him to have it again." He tied the ribbon around Rex's neck. The dog lifted his head, not showing anything, but somehow standing taller. "He's still part of the unit," Marcus said. James nodded. "And now he's part of my family too." A gentle breeze swept across the yard, rustling the ribbon at Rex's neck, like a silent song rising in the stillness of dusk. The afternoon drifted slowly in James's backyard, as if the whole world were holding its breath for a goodbye no one had spoken. After tying the singed K9 badge around Rex's neck, Marcus sat silently beside him, fingers gently stroking the silver-streaked fur. James, sitting opposite, could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't just a reunion anymore. It was a pause, a question hanging between them. Where does Rex go from here? Hattie had made a pot of warm tea and set it on the porch table. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed Marcus's every move. The soldier who wasn't just wrestling with memories, but also facing a quieter battle inside. "You've taken good care of him," Marcus finally said after a long silence. James nodded. "I just did what I thought was right. And Rex helped too. He's taught me so much without saying a word." Marcus gave a faint smile. He glanced at Rex, lying next to James's foot, head resting gently on the boy's shoe, just like during his moments of rest. "He used to rest his head on my boot, exactly like that," Marcus said quietly. "When I was writing letters home, when I slept on sandbags, when I lost a teammate." His words made the air go still. The wind rustled the trees, and a sparrow chirped somewhere along the wooden fence. "You lost a lot of people?" James asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked into Rex's sleepy eyes and said in a steady tone, "Enough to know that anything that survives with you, human or dog, is worth more than anything else." For the first time, James understood. Maybe what Marcus needed wasn't just to find a friend, but to finish something left undone. That evening, Hattie made her signature spicy stew, Rex's favorite since the day he arrived. Marcus, not usually fond of spice, still finished his bowl. The three of them sat around the table, with Rex at the center, like a silent bond holding them together. After dinner, James brought out an old tennis ball, the first toy he'd ever bought Rex with his leftover savings. He tossed it lightly, Rex caught it, made a quick circle and then placed it in Marcus's hand. Both James and Marcus froze. "He remembers that game?" James blurted out. Marcus pressed his lips together, eyes a little moist. "It was what we used to play to decompress between patrol shifts. Looks like he hasn't forgotten." Rex whimpered softly, eyes shifting from Marcus to James. There was something in that gaze, as if he were saying, "I remember, but I belong here now." Night fell. Hattie had gone to bed. Marcus sat alone on the porch, cooling tea in hand. James sat across from him in silence. After a long while, Marcus finally asked, "James, if I wanted to take Rex back to Colorado with me, what would you think?" James lowered his head. His chest tightened. He didn't cry, but a quiet storm raged behind his eyes. "I think he'll go if he wants to, but I also believe he'll stay where he knows he's needed." Marcus nodded. "I saw that from the moment he lay next to you, the way he looked at you, the way he jumped through fire to save a child you didn't even know. He's not just a soldier anymore, he's become the protector of this place." Rex, as if sensing something, walked over and laid his head on Marcus's knee, one last time. Then he turned, walked back to James, and lay down by his feet, as if choosing the rest of his life. Marcus took a deep breath. "I drove 3 days to find him. Turns out I just needed to see that he was loved. Now I know it's time to go." He removed the original badge, a small metal triangle engraved with K93-517SH-Bravo 7. He placed it in James's hand. "Keep it, not for him, for you. So you'll always remember. You saved a part of me I thought I'd lost forever." James gripped the badge tightly. His eyes were red, but he smiled. I promised to protect him like a friend, like a warrior. The next morning, the silver pickup rolled out of Edgewood, leaving a faint trail of dust on the red dirt road. On the front steps, James and Rex stood watching. No one waved. No goodbyes were spoken. Only a silent gaze stretched out to the horizon, and the soft wind brushed Rex's neck, where the small badge gently swayed with the rhythm of his steady breath. The silver pickup truck came to a stop by a gentle slope, where the western sky was stained with a smoky orange hue, the color of old battlefields. Marcus stepped out and let out a deep breath. He wasn't going home tonight. He needed to stay here, an old campsite he used to visit whenever emotions grew too heavy to bear within the four walls of a house. He pitched a tent, lit a fire, and sat beside the glowing embers, turning an old lighter in his hand, a birthday gift from a fallen comrade. Next to him sat a pouch containing a few military photographs and a copy of his former unit's records, which he'd always kept for no particular reason. The night was quiet, filled only with the soft crackle of fire and the whisper of wind through pine trees. Then, from deep within his chest, memories long locked away began to stir. Not memories of bombs, blood, or the screams of dying comrades, but of a gaze. The gaze of a young girl, nameless, voiceless, and the gaze of Shadow, the K-9 who once followed him everywhere across the burning deserts. 2019. Afghanistan. Kandahar. It was the second day of a buffer zone patrol, a small village between two rocky ridges. The temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius, so dry that sweat evaporated before it could settle. Bravo 7 had split into two teams. One stationed at the village entrance, Marcus's unit moved deeper in. Shadow, dusty-coated and wearing light armor, with his left ear slightly drooped, stayed 3 steps ahead. At every doorway, he paused, sniffed, and tilted his head. He never barked. But Marcus always understood. If Shadow didn't stop, it was safe. At 13:47, while inspecting a crumbling house, Shadow suddenly veered off. No command, no signal. He dashed through a narrow gap between two tilting walls. "Shadow, come back!" Marcus shouted. But Shadow didn't turn around. Marcus chased after him, heart pounding. He had no idea what Shadow had sensed. There was no sound, no warning. Then he saw it, a dry patch of land behind the house, strewn with rubble and holes. In the deepest hole, just big enough to hide a child, a little girl curled up, arms over her head, trembling. Shadow didn't jump in. He stood guard above her, his eyes locked on a collapsed wall to the left, where Marcus instantly spotted a sniper's glint. There was no time to think. Marcus lunged forward and fired. The M4's round tore through the air, breaking the silence. A thud. Then silence again. No one was hurt. Shadow stayed put, unmoving. No growl, no charge. Just a shield, standing between the girl and anything else that might come. The girl, maybe 6 years old, had wide black eyes and a dirt-smudged face. When Marcus approached, she didn't speak or cry, but her eyes, those were the eyes of a soul just pulled back from the brink, staring at Shadow like seeing something beyond human comprehension. Marcus crouched and gently touched Shadow's shoulder. Shadow looked back, calm, needing no praise. He had done what was needed, not out of command, but because someone needed protection. That night, Marcus wrote in his journal, "Today, Shadow didn't save me. He saved a small soul war had overlooked. Maybe it was instinct, but I believe something more lives inside him. I'll call it the Silent Angel." The girl was brought back to base and cared for by medics. No one knew her name or language, but whenever Shadow came close, she smiled. The only smile Marcus had seen in 6 months of deployment. The wind whistled through the trees. Marcus sat by the dying fire, eyes closed, heartbeat drifting to another year. "You did it again," he whispered. "You saved a child. Somewhere else. With your own heart. No one told you to." He exhaled slowly, like letting go of something heavy. "James doesn't just have a dog. He has an angel. I kept you in my heart as a loss, but now I'll carry you as a miracle." At dawn, he packed up the tent, put out the fire, and tucked the lighter into his pocket. Around his neck, instead of a military dog tag, hung a simple cord with a single faded photo. Shadow standing beside the girl, Marcus next to them, face dusty but smiling, the only surviving photo from that time. He had kept it in his wallet, never daring to look. Now he wore it around his neck, not to remember sorrow, but to honor something that had lived. The story of the heroic dog who saved a child from fire had now traveled far beyond Edgewood, spreading across veteran forums and animal rescue groups. One photo in particular went viral. Rex standing between James and Marcus, the canine badge glinting in the morning sun, a symbol of a forgotten past finding a place in the present. James never expected it. From one selfless act by Rex, a whole new storm had begun. 3 days after the reunion, a letter arrived by express mail. It was stamped from an unknown organization, ATDC, Advanced Tactical Dog Command. A note scrawled on the envelope. Reclassification of misfiled asset post-discharge. Hattie opened it. Halfway through, she went still. She handed the letter to James and said quietly, "You need to read this alone." James sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as he flipped the pages. Upon reviewing Bravo 7 records and retired K9 data, we confirm the subject Rex, ID K93-517SH, is Shadow, an active-duty combat canine still under the jurisdiction of Advanced Tactical Dog Command. His appearance in a civilian auction was due to misclassification. We request immediate return of this asset for recovery and investigation. Signed, Ethan Cray, Executive Director ATDC. James stared in disbelief. Asset? Recovery? Return? They were talking about Rex like he was a tool, an item gone astray, not a living soul who'd stood beside him in his darkest moments. That night, Marcus returned, bringing a USB drive with records he'd pulled from the military system. James showed him the letter. Marcus read it all, quietly, then set it down. "I know them," he said. "A TDC isn't your average training center. It's a military private hybrid. They train K9S for direct combat engagement. The training is intense, but legally it's a gray zone." "What do you mean?" James asked. "They're not fully military, not fully civilian. They operate in a gap no one oversees. Every dog has an ID. It's considered tactical property. If one goes missing, they can claim it." "But Rex isn't property," James said, voice shaking. "I took care of him. I saved him. He chose me." Marcus looked at him, then down at Rex lying beside James, soft-eyed at the sound of his name. "He's not property," Marcus said. "He's a soul, trained as a weapon but still carrying a heart." Silence filled the kitchen. The next morning, a black SUV pulled up. 2 men in suits stepped out, no military insignia. One was Cray, the same name as the letter. His face was stone, but not hostile. They asked to speak with James and Hattie. In the living room, Rex sat beside James, unmoving. "We're here to reclaim K93-517SH. You are unlawfully in possession," Cray said, placing a file on the table. James started to protest, but Hattie raised a hand. "You say unlawfully? Do you have a deed of ownership? Or just your internal paperwork?" Cray paused. "This is a tactical asset from our registry, misclassified into a civilian auction. And when it was misclassified, what did you do to stop the sale?" Hattie pressed. Cray didn't answer. "No," he finally said. Marcus stood. Shadow, his military name, completed over 20 combat missions. He saved at least 3 lives, including mine. He was left behind because of a campaign error. And now you call him a lost asset and want to recover him? We can read just fine." Tension filled the room. Cray stayed silent. His partner gave a subtle signal. "We'll return," Cray said. As he walked out, he glanced back at Rex, who met his eyes. No growling, no fear. Just a stare, as if to say, "I know who you are, I'm not going back." That night James couldn't sleep. Rex lay at the foot of his bed, whimpering now and then in his dreams. James reached into his drawer and gripped the badge Marcus had given him. He had lost a lot in life: his parents, his sense of belonging. But this time he knew that if he did nothing, he would lose the one being who made him believe he could protect someone again. Now, he had to face the hardest truth: to fight an entire system just so one dog could stay where he had chosen to belong. When the black SUV door slammed shut before James's eyes, he knew time was running out. "They'll come back," Marcus said evenly, though his gaze had darkened. "And next time, they'll have an official warrant." That same evening, Hattie made a phone call to an old friend, Mrs. Evelyn May, a retired attorney who still advised on animal rights cases. Less than 2 days later, Evelyn arrived in Edgewood, carrying a thick stack of documents, silver-rimmed glasses, and a sharpness in her eyes that James never expected from a white-haired old lady. "You said you don't want to lose Rex," Evelyn said slowly. "Then you have to prove that Rex is no longer property, but an autonomous being with emotional value and redemption. It sounds far-fetched, but it's not unprecedented." James nodded, eyes lighting up. "I'll do whatever it takes." Evelyn smiled. "Then we start with this. Find out who Rex is." At the same time, Marcus began digging through old memories, not just in his mind, but in the classified records he still possessed. He handed Evelyn military reports from Kandahar, photos of Rex as Shadow, K9 behavioral evaluations, and even the picture of Shadow beside the Afghan girl. "They want to keep him like a tool," Marcus said. "But I know, no dog does what Rex has done unless it chooses to. He doesn't just react, he feels." Meanwhile, James was given a special assignment: write an emotional statement, not as a legal argument, but as a testimony from the heart. Every night he sat at his desk, with Rex lying at his feet, and began to write. "I don't know who he used to be. I don't know how many battlefields he's walked, how many explosions he's heard. But I know those eyes. The first time I met him, they were the eyes of a soul that had once been left behind. And those same eyes made me feel like I wasn't alone anymore. If the law calls Rex property, then I ask to be the caretaker of that property, with all the love, care, and respect I have. But if given the choice, I'd call him by another name: friend." 2 weeks later, the first hearing took place at the Clearwater County Courthouse. The courtroom was small, with dark wooden walls and a cold light. Presiding over the case was Judge Richter, a stern but fair woman known for her integrity. Representing ATDC were Ethan Cray and a rimless glasses-wearing lawyer in a gray suit. On James's side, Evelyn May, Marcus as a witness, and Rex, allowed to be present wearing a soft collar, lying peacefully beside James. Evelyn opened. "Your Honor, I'm not here to argue whether Rex, formerly known as Shadow, served in the military. That has been proven. I'm here to argue that this dog is no longer property, but an independent being who has found a home and built bonds that transcend legal definitions." The opposing counsel responded, "Based on ID tags, training markers, and internal data, we affirm Rex is a misclassified property. We don't deny his contributions, but that doesn't change legal ownership." Marcus was called to the stand. He stepped up slowly, hand on the mic, voice steady but heavy. "I'm the last surviving member of Bravo 7 who saw Shadow charge into the fire to save civilians and comrades, and who was then abandoned due to an administrative error. Don't tell me this is a file mistake. Don't tell me this soul deserves to be dragged back to live like a machine." The lawyer shot back, "Sir, we're not here to evaluate personal feelings, only legal ownership." Marcus stared straight at him. "And because you only see ownership, you've lost what matters most: that some beings don't belong to where they were made, but to where they chose to love." The room fell silent. Judge Richter looked down at the files, then raised her eyes. "I will need more time to consider, but I have one question for the plaintiff. In the 3 years following Shadow's disappearance, did you ever initiate a search, file a report, or attempt a recovery of your asset?" The lawyer was silent. Cray bowed his head. No. Judge Richter nodded slightly and took notes. That night, on the ride home, James sat next to Marcus, with Rex resting his head on the boy's lap. Light rain fell. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. James looked out the window, the faint glow reflecting in his eyes. "I don't know if the law will side with me. But I know, even if I lose, I won't let Rex go back to a place where no one understands who he is." Marcus gently squeezed his shoulder. "And if you need me, I'll stand with you, all the way." Rex, as if understanding, let out a soft whine and exhaled gently, saying in his way, "You're not alone." January in Edgewood was colder than usual. Snow fell early, covering rooftops in a soft white that soothed the tension stretching over the past weeks. The final hearing ended quietly. Judge Richter didn't declare a winner. She concluded that the ownership documentation was unclear and that Rex, formerly Shadow, was a special case, falling outside current legal frameworks. Custody would remain unchanged unless the parties reached a separate agreement. In one corner, James gripped Hattie's hand. He didn't cry. He had no more tears left. Evelyn sighed and closed the thick case file like a novel without an ending. "You didn't lose," she said. "But we haven't won yet." James nodded faintly. But what hurt most wasn't the verdict. It was Rex's gaze, still loyal, still calm, as if he never needed a court to affirm his right to stay. Marcus patted his shoulder. "Don't forget, sometimes justice arrives in ways no one expects." That afternoon, the whole town of Edgewood gathered at the community center for the annual town meeting. What was usually a dry year-end review had one unexpected addition: a motion to discuss Rex's case. James stood among the crowd. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The townspeople already knew the story. They'd read the articles, watched the news, seen the old dog leap into flames to save a child, and now faced the threat of being hauled away like a mislabeled parcel. The bakery owner spoke first. "I used to be scared of Rex, thought he was skinny, scarred. But now I know he listened to me cry every Monday morning without judgment. No one does that but family. And he doesn't belong to one of us. He belongs to all of us." Then, a young boy from James's school stood up, holding a crayon drawing of Rex with crooked letters underneath. "My hero." The room broke into applause. Some wiped away tears. Just as the emotion began to settle, something unexpected happened. A scream. A woman collapsed in the crowd. Panic. James froze. But Rex, without command, slipped through the chairs and bolted straight to the woman having a seizure. He didn't bark. He pressed his body gently against hers, keeping her safe from harm, letting out soft whimpers, like a lullaby through the storm. A medic arrived moments later. As they lifted the woman into the ambulance, a nurse turned to James. "If that dog hadn't held her that way, she could have swallowed her tongue. Most people don't even know how to do that." James looked at Rex. The dog had returned to his side, panting softly, eyes bright. Not proud, just complete, like he'd done what needed doing, as always. The next morning, Ethan Cray from ATDC called Marcus. His voice was rougher, no longer cold. "We're not pursuing the case any further." Marcus paused, stunned. "Why?" Cray sighed. "Not because of paperwork. No legal pressure. We saw that dog in the eyes of this town, and we saw the life he's chosen. Some things can't be defined by law. Some decisions must be made by the heart." Marcus hung up, still stunned. But more than surprised, he felt thankful. That night, James sat on his porch, watching Rex stretched out beside him, ears twitching in the wind. "You know," James whispered, "I never thought a miracle would come this way. Not from the court, not from rules, but from one moment where you did the right thing, without being asked." Rex didn't answer. He just stretched and rested his head on James's lap, like always. Above them, snow fell lightly. No noise, no rush. As if the world itself was saying, "You kept what mattered most, not by fighting, but by loving." By the end of January, the snow had started to melt, but winter inside James had only just begun. Rex no longer ran to greet him at the gate. He still tried to stand, still wagged his tail, still rested his head on James's arm as the boy studied at the kitchen table. But everything was slower, heavier, and came with shorter, more labored breaths each day. At first, James thought it was just old age. Rex, though resilient, was over 10. A long life for a dog who had survived war, injuries, abandonment, and healing. But when he began to whimper softly going up the stairs, and one morning couldn't stand even after being called 3 times, James knew something deeper was happening. They took Rex to the veterinary clinic in the next town. Dr. Johansson, who had treated hundreds of animals, sat unusually still after reading the x-rays. He didn't look James in the eye as he said it. A tumor in the right hind leg, quite large, pressing against the femur. "What is it?" James asked, voice trembling. Johansson gripped his hand. "James, it's bone cancer, osteosarcoma. Fairly common in older dogs, especially those with a history of structural trauma, like service animals." The air in the room seemed to freeze. James could hear the ticking clock. Even Rex's uneven breathing seemed louder in the silence, as if he too sensed the tension. "Is surgery possible?" James asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes," the vet replied. "We'd have to amputate the leg, along with chemotherapy. 3 months, minimum. But given Rex's age, his condition, and past combat injuries, the recovery odds are around 30%, and the process will be painful. Extremely painful." James sat quietly, hands gripping the edge of the chair. "What if we do nothing?" This time, Johansson looked him in the eye. "If you choose to let him live naturally, we can prescribe pain meds. He'd have about 3, maybe 4 months. A decent quality of life. No long walks, but he could lie next to you, eat well, and breathe easily. Until the time comes." That sentence felt like fate knocking on the door. That evening, James sat with Rex on the porch. The town was still buzzing from the recent hearings, the heroism, the hard-won victory. But now, there were no more applause, no more flashing cameras. Just James, his old dog, and the cold wind rustling through the pines. Rex lay curled in his lap, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady, like the low hum of a machine that had seen everything and was now gently shutting down. James ran his hand down Rex's spine, feeling each bone beneath thinning fur. "You've fought your whole life," he whispered. "I don't know if I have the right to ask you to fight anymore." A tear dropped onto Rex's nose. He opened his eyes and looked at James. No sound, no movement, just a gaze, deep and still, like a lake before a storm. A look that said without words, "If I could choose, I'd still stay. But if I must go, let it be in love, not in pain." Hattie stepped outside. She placed a hand on James's shoulder. "Sometimes," she said softly, "love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go the right way." James nodded. He understood. He'd learned it from Rex himself, who had once been given up, left behind, yet held no resentment. He knew Rex deserved to leave not as a patient, but as a friend. The next morning, James and Hattie returned to the clinic. They didn't sign the surgery form. Instead, they asked for pain relief, anti-inflammatories, and a special diet to keep Rex as comfortable as possible. Evelyn, the old attorney, sent a small bouquet with a note that read, "Every angel has to land sometime. Let it be gentle." Marcus, the friend who once survived war alongside Rex, drove across 2 states to place a hand-stitched patch around the dog's neck. "Bravo 7, always fights but knows when to stop." James watched Rex lying on the rug beneath the window, sunlight warming his now silver fur. Though he no longer ran, Rex still lifted his head when James entered the room. Though he didn't bark, he still pressed his nose into James's palm, as if to say, "I'm still here. Don't go far." And James knew then, the time left wasn't for counting down. It was for counting every moment still lived together. From the living room window, the Edgewood sky was pale purple, like an old silk scarf. Winter clung to the rooftops, but no more snow fell. The wind moved gently, as if careful not to wake a deep sleeper. Inside, the soft yellow lamp cast a warm glow on the carpet where Rex lay curled in a gray wool blanket. His fur was now whiter than snow, but his eyes still held warmth. The same look from the day he first met James. Not as bright as when he ran into the fire, but peaceful, as if he'd seen enough, lived enough, and now only needed a little more time to hear his loved ones whisper near him. James sat close, back against the armchair. He said nothing. His hand rested on Rex's chest, feeling the slow, fragile, but steady breath beneath. He didn't cry. He had no tears left, only a boundless gratitude for every single day spent with such a soul. The door opened quietly. Marcus entered first, moving softly, as if afraid to disturb the air. He wore his uniform, no rank, just the Bravo 7 badge pinned to his chest, the same one that once hung on Rex's collar. He knelt beside James, placing a hand gently on Rex's head. "Hey there, comrade," Marcus whispered. "You've gone farther than any of us, but tonight I'm here, so you don't have to go alone." Then came Hattie, the one who had taken James to that fair to buy a rabbit, and ended up bringing home destiny. She sat down on the other side of Rex, her fingers brushing his back, over old scars that now faded with time. "Elena's on her way," she said softly. "She took the last bus from campus. She didn't want him to leave before saying goodbye." Luke arrived last. He said nothing, only handed James a drawing. James and Rex sitting beneath a tree, sunset behind them. In the picture, Rex wore no leash and bore no scars, only upright ears and a faraway gaze, like he was guarding the whole sky. "He taught my brother how to walk past his trauma," Luke said quietly. "Now I think he's teaching us how to accept what we can't change." James nodded. He looked around at the people gathered. No loud sobs, no collapsing grief. Only silence, like a quiet vigil for a tired warrior. Rex took one deep breath, a long exhale not from exhaustion, but as if releasing his final burden. He opened his eyes to look at each person, then finally met James's gaze, one last look that said, "Thank you, for believing, for holding on, for not letting go." James leaned in, whispering near Rex's ear. "You don't have to keep watch anymore. I'm here now." Rex closed his eyes. 1 beat, 2. Then his breathing softened, like smoke vanishing into the air. No whimpers, no twitch, no resistance, just sleep. Deep, long, peaceful, like a soldier laying down his rifle at dawn after guarding the night one last time. The next morning, the snow returned lightly. Edgewood woke to the news. Rex, the hero dog, passed away in the arms of the family he chose. The local paper wrote, "Rex didn't die abandoned. He didn't die on the battlefield. He passed as one who had fulfilled his mission, loved, recognized, and remembered not just for what he did, but for who he became." James held no formal funeral, but the town knew the day was special. Many hung brown ribbons, Rex's fur color, on their doors. Some left flowers at the community center. Others wrote shadow in the snow, as if to say he never truly disappeared. Marcus returned to his unit. But before he left, he said, "For the first time in my life, I understand. War isn't the only place that forges warriors. Some are born simply to heal." James placed the Bravo 7 badge in a wooden box, setting it beside a photo of Rex lying in the sunlight. Beneath the frame, he wrote, "Rex, friend, teacher, hero. No medal is needed. No orders were given. Just love and being loved." March arrived, bringing with it the first warmth of spring. Snow melted slowly off rooftops, and the fields outside Edgewood began to sprout the first green shoots. But while the land changed its coat, something in the hearts of the townspeople remained. Rex's absence wasn't just a space in James's little home. It was a silence that lingered across the town. A glance, without thinking, toward the steps where he once lay. A habit of placing a hand beside a chair, only to find no head resting there anymore. So when the first idea of a statue was brought up in a community meeting, no one objected. Not a single voice. No vote was needed. No budget breakdowns. An elderly man stood up, hands trembling around the microphone. "We're not building a statue for a dog. We're building a statue for the best parts of ourselves, parts that Rex reminded us still exist." The project was named simply the Rex Monument, the Silent Watcher. The site chosen was the center of Edgewood Park, beneath the old oak tree where children played each afternoon, and where James had once sat for hours, getting to know Rex for the first time. The sculpture was created by a local artist, based on a sketch by Luke, the young boy who had once gifted James a drawing during the hearing. In the statue, Rex doesn't raise his head like a battle-hardened hero, nor does he lie in a sorrowful pose. He stands calm, front legs slightly bent, ears relaxed, eyes looking out. Not fixed on any one point, but as if watching over a world only he can see. At the base, a small brass plaque was set into polished granite. On it, the engraving reads, "For the souls we thought were lost, who kept us whole. Rex, Shadow. K9, friend, hero, healer." James was the last person allowed to lay his hand on the soil before the foundation was poured. In that moment, he closed his eyes, as if whispering a final message to Rex, not in words, but with every ounce of love that had never left. On the day of the unveiling, the sky was crystal clear. The whole town gathered beneath the oak. Children wore brown ribbons. Adults wore shirts with Rex's image. A few veterans arrived in uniform, bearing K9 unit insignias from years past. Marcus was invited to speak. He stepped to the podium, holding the microphone for a long time before speaking. "There are some warriors," he said, "who don't carry weapons or wear armor. They just have a heart that won't give up, and eyes that never turn away from another's pain." He looked at James, standing quietly in the crowd, clutching the ribbon around his wrist. Marcus continued. "Rex wasn't a miracle. He was the product of loyalty forged through hardship, of wounds accepted, and of a love that asked for nothing. If he could say one thing, I believe it would be, I saw the best in people, because they saw the best in me." No loud applause followed, just quiet tears, falling like the soft breeze of March. Since that day, the monument became a place people often visited, not to mourn, but to reflect, to remember, to teach their children about loyalty, courage, and most of all, to listen. Letters, toys, and old collars were quietly left at the statue's base each week. No names, no notes, just the quiet presence of love. James still visited every Sunday afternoon, sitting beneath the tree, sometimes just to read. One day he left a small folded paper that read, in shaky handwriting, "I'm doing okay, Rex. But when I'm low, I still remember what it felt like to touch your neck, and believe I wasn't alone." Summer arrived early in Edgewood. Beneath the soft sunlight of April, Rex's monument stood silently, like a soldier in the center of town, no longer walking but guarding memory. Every Saturday morning, James sat on a nearby bench with an old leather notebook. On the first page, a photo of Rex. On the others, pages slowly filling with careful writing, occasionally messy, like emotion rushing faster than the pen. There are too many souls like Rex, who fought, who served, and were forgotten. If one dog can save 3 lives, why can't we save the ones like him? And from that thought, the Shadow Project was born, named after the name Rex once carried in war, now a symbol of healing. It began when James found a short article about retired canines left without homes. Many placed in shelters, some deactivated due to clerical errors, and others simply forgotten. Some had physical injuries, others carried invisible wounds, just like Rex had. James couldn't sit still. With help from Hattie and the town of Edgewood, who now deeply understood the value of a dog no longer usable, James launched a non-profit called the Shadow Project. Its mission was simple, yet deeply humane, to provide shelter, care, and most importantly, a path forward for retired service and therapy dogs, so they wouldn't have to fade away unseen. The first center opened right in Edgewood, in a refurbished old warehouse next to the school. After renovation, it became a warm space with living quarters, therapy areas, and a large grassy yard, where the dogs could run freely for the first time in years. Marcus was the first to volunteer as a lead trainer. He refused a salary. When James handed him a contract, Marcus shook his head and set a small box on the table. Inside, the Bravo 7 badge that once belonged to Rex. "Shadow taught me something no training program ever could," Marcus said. "Now I want to pass it on, not through commands, but through trust." Under his guidance, the dogs were retrained, not to fight, but to live again, to respond to gentle voices, to sit beside trembling hands, to distinguish dreams from gunfire. Luke, with his creative talent and endless affection for Rex, took over communications. He built a website called We're Shadow, where each dog was introduced as an individual, with photos, stories, and rebirth dates, none labeled ownerless. Each profile was written with emotional depth, once the companion of a veteran battling PTSD. Helped a nonverbal girl step outside for the first time. Now in need of a new home to rest peacefully. Luke's first article ended with a line that echoed through the internet. "When we think they've quietly vanished, maybe they're still holding us together?" In just 3 weeks, over 20 dogs from different states arrived at the Edgewood Center. Among them, one blind in one eye, one with only 3 legs, and one, according to a vet, who had just months left. James welcomed each one like meeting pieces of Rex returning in different forms. The eyes were different, but the need was the same. A hug, a place to lie down, no longer expected to stand guard. On the grand opening day, James stood on a small stage, holding the only photo he had left. Rex at sunset, the light glowing on his back like an invisible cloak. Before him stood a crowd of veterans, families once aided by therapy dogs, animal lovers, and children of the town, all gathered beneath a sign that read, "The Shadow Project, because no soul deserves to be forgotten." James didn't read the speech he had prepared. He just spoke from the heart. "The dog I once rescued ended up rescuing me. And today we want to give that chance to every dog like him. Not to leave in darkness, but in light, in love, and the sound of their name." In the crowd, Marcus nodded. Luke wiped his glasses. Hattie clapped first. Then the entire gathering rose, applauding as if welcoming someone home from a final mission. That night, in the center yard, a 3-legged dog lay on its back, sleeping without flinching. Another, blind in one eye, received a new name, Hope. And in the hush of twilight, James stood by the window, gazing at the stars. He didn't speak, but somewhere far beyond, if a soul was still watching, it too might have wagged its tail gently. "You don't have to bring me back, because you've made sure I never really left." Edgewood rarely hosted festivals. In recent years, the noise and flash of the outside world seemed to bypass this peaceful little town. But on a Saturday at the end of that June, a day of strangely beautiful sunshine, every street leading to the town square bloomed with tiny flags, balloons, and laughter. Today, Edgewood held its first ever festival for retired dogs. The event's name was coined by Luke, who printed posters in his signature soft handwriting and taped them in every cafe, bakery, and library. "Not all heroes wear armor. Some just wear collars and choose to walk beside us, quietly, for a lifetime. Today, we celebrate them." It was meant to be a small gathering. But as the Shadow Project's list of rescued dogs grew, as newspapers picked up the story, and as the townsfolk remembered all that Rex had once done, the event blossomed into the biggest celebration Edgewood had ever seen. The town park was strung with lights, fabric flags embroidered with paw prints, and pots of sunflowers planted for warmth. A small stage stood near the Rex Monument, where, that evening, a special tribute would be held. James, now 15, walked among the crowd, no longer the boy who bought an old dog at the fair, but the founder of a mission that had saved dozens of souls once left behind. He wore a simple white shirt with "Shadow Project" printed on the chest, and around his neck, a brown ribbon, the color of Rex's coat. Beside him walked Marcus, quiet as ever, holding a board listing the names of every dog adopted through the center. At the center of the board was one empty frame, left open for the one who started it all, Rex, Shadow, forever walking with you. On the lawn, the retired dogs strolled beside their new families. Some limped from missing limbs, some were blind in one eye, some simply lay in small pushcarts. But none were alone. People applauded, not because the dogs performed tricks, but simply because they were here, alive, present, and loved. Midway through the event, James noticed his mother, Elena Bryant, quietly standing at the back of the crowd. It was her first public appearance since her husband, a firefighter, had died in a building collapse 3 years earlier. She stood still, hands clasped, eyes locked on the statue, unblinking. In all that time, she had never cried. Not when the news arrived, not when she was handed back his fire helmet, not even when James screamed through his nightmares. But now, amidst laughter, soft barking, and sunlight warming the graying coats of aging dogs, she raised a trembling hand to her mouth. Marcus started to step forward, but James held him back. He understood. This moment needed no witness. Then the tears came. Not loud, not desperate, just quiet streams down her cheeks, soaking into her collar like the sky letting go without wind. A woman beside her gently took her hand. Elena squeezed back, and for the first time in years she spoke. Something just came home. Everyone understood. She wasn't speaking of her husband. She was speaking of belief, that miracles still existed in this world. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, paper lanterns rose into the sky, each bearing the name of a dog who had served, healed, been forgotten, and found again. A young child asked James, "Where's Rex now?" He knelt, ruffled the child's hair, and pointed upward. "He's watching all of us, from somewhere higher." And just then, a soft breeze lifted the ribbon around James's neck. He looked up. In that fleeting moment, he felt it clearly. Rex wasn't just stone in a statue. He was still running, quietly, invisibly, like all true warriors who never leave the formation. The Edgewood High School lawn shimmered under the late May sun. Rows of white-covered chairs lined the grass, chestnut-colored ribbons, Rex's color, woven through the traditional school blue. Today was graduation day. For most seniors, it marked the close of one chapter and the start of another. But for James Bryant, this ceremony was not just the end of his youth. It was his final tribute to the friend he had never truly lost. When it was his turn to speak, the breeze tugged gently at the tassel on his cap. He took a deep breath, then began, not from paper, but from memory. "I used to think graduation was the biggest event of my life. But a few years ago, I learned that real change doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in quiet meetings that feel small, until they change everything. I once met a warrior, not in uniform, not with medals, but who saved more than one life. He saved me, from silence, from confusion, from a grief I couldn't name." The crowd grew still. A few older teachers held hands. Luke smiled gently from the front row. Marcus leaned against the old oak tree, hand pressed to his chest. James continued, calm and steady. "His name was Rex, but before he was my friend, he was Shadow, a silent guardian on the battlefield. Later, he became a shelter for a lost 14-year-old boy. Rex didn't teach me how to win. He taught me how to love things that seemed broken, to take fragments and turn them into something that could carry others." James looked up. His eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. "Today, I'm not just graduating from school. I'm graduating from pain, from loss, and stepping into a future where I will carry Rex's gaze with me, to care for those who've been forgotten." Warm applause rose, gentle, full. But James didn't leave the stage. He turned toward the audience and made a simple hand signal. Anyone who had known Rex would recognize it instantly. Guard. A moment of stillness. Then, from behind the curtain, a young puppy emerged. Dark brown fur, drooping ears, eyes still baby-soft but blazing with light. He walked slowly toward James, not by a leash, not by name, as if guided by a memory older than himself. James knelt and clapped softly. The puppy stopped in front of him and looked up. A still moment, as if Rex had returned, not to repeat, but to pass on. James slipped a small leather collar around his neck. On it, engraved, "Bravo, Otto, continue." After the ceremony, many stayed behind. Children ran across the lawn with Shadow Project dogs. Adults whispered, "Something real began here, not a movement, but a belief." Marcus touched James's shoulder and said softly, "Rex would be proud, not because you kept going, but because you knew when to begin." Elena, James's mother, stood alone watching the sky. She no longer searched for her husband up there. She looked forward, toward James, and the puppy now sleeping peacefully at his feet. For the first time, she whispered to herself, "Thank you, Rex. Thank you for bringing him back whole." Rex is gone, but his journey continues. In James's heart, in every rescued paw print, in the eyes of a town that once learned how to see worth in the forgotten. That dog didn't just heal wounds, he planted seeds of love. And those once saved have now become the ones who save others. What about you? Has a dog, or any small creature, ever left a mark on your life that won't fade? Share your story below. We're always listening. And if you believe that every soul, no matter how scarred, deserves one more chance to be loved, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us spread stories that move hearts. Because sometimes a single story can save a life, just like Rex once did.